Okay, so welcome everybody to Bava Metzia, Daf Zion. And today's year we're going to have Jessica and Sarah, so I'll give you the center stage.
Okay. So welcome everyone. We're going to be looking at the Sugya and Rishonim in a shocking twist. But before we get started, we wanted to ask people, one of the concepts we're going to be thinking a lot about over this year is shutafut. And so if you could just take 30 seconds to think now, and then write in the Zoom chat one or two sentences about what you think shutafut is. And then later in the sugya, we'll be testing those definitions against the sugya and against the Rishonim. You don't need to write yet, but I am looking for a sentence or two rather than a couple of words. So Joel and Noam, you have some more seconds to think, but
this is a high bar here. I thought I could just,
yeah.
It can be speculative. In other words, you don't have to be like convinced that this is the definition that is like applicable across all of halacha. Surprise, I don't think that is a thing. But maybe it is.
So I think whenever people are ready now, you can type your one or two sentences, which Aaron is still not 2 words, I'm sorry.
Of our mind for the moment. And now we're just going to read the sugya, and again, in a shocking twist of what we're going to do. So maybe, Joel, are you willing to just like kick us off and be mercilessly interrupted?
Sure, I am. We finished the Palge. Yeah, we're at the Rami Bar Chama. Is that where I am?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right.
So it's like, I don't know, 5 lines down or whatever.
Yeah.
On
Amar Rami Bar Chama. Zoto merit, right? We'll get into what zot is. Hamagbia Metzia Chavero kana Chavero. Should I translate as I go, or how do you want me to do it? This would be a good.
Yeah, translate that much to start.
Okay, this says this. We'll find out eventually means our Mishnah. What part of our Mishnah we won't find out today.
Put a pin in that. We're not going to figure that out yet.
Yeah. Okay. But something teaches us, and of course I lost where I was saying that if somebody lifts a found object for their friend has now acquired. They've done it. The kinyan has worked. Their friend is now the owner of this item. So, de'isal kadatach lo kana chavero te'asezo kimishu menachat al gabei karka, and maybe or maybe not vezo kimishu menachat al gabei karka velo yiknez lo zeh velo zeh. Because if you don't,
maybe stop there rather than
stop there for the moment. Oh, translate, but then don't keep reading.
Yeah,
I wasn't going to go beyond that. So because then we get to Rava. So because if you were to not to say that somebody who lifts an object for their friend does not acquire it for their friend, then this seemingly being our talit in our Mishnah, right? It's as if it's laying on the ground. Maybe one half of it's laying on the ground, or maybe the whole thing, depending on how you want to read this. And the other side, or maybe from the other perspective, it's laying on the ground, and neither one of them has acquired it, because in order to acquire something, you have to fully lift it up, right? Assuming you're doing hagbaha as your kinyan. Rather, do we not learn from this that somebody who picks up a found object for their friend has acquired it for their friend? All right. So I can do more explanation if you want, or I can just leave it as the strict translation at this point. So
I feel like it's good to leave it as a strict translation, if only to then like try to complicate it for a moment. So sure. Sorry, I don't know what that was, but some spam call. Okay, so yeah, so let's leave Zoto merit out of it for the moment. We'll go back to that. But just can you explain like what is the case that's, if you just had this statement, maybe if you imagine Zoto merit to not be there, what would you think that this is saying? Like what is the case that's being described?
So Well, it's the first case is a big question about are we talking about shlichut or not? But I'll give two versions of it. One version is
Yeah.
I see a really nice, I don't know, shirt on the ground, and I'm like, Sarah would really like this shirt. So I pick up the shirt with in mind, or a statement, or who knows, I'm going to leave all that ambiguous as well, that I am picking the shirt up as a kinyan for Sarah. It's like essentially like zoche adam shelo b'fanav kind of case, right? That's version one. Version two might be something like, and this will run us into the next Mishnah, but Sarah says to me, right, Joel, there's a nice shirt over there on the ground. Can you go pick it up to acquire it for me? Right. And later, I think on Daf Yod or something, we'll get into like a difference between saying, pick it up for me versus bring it to me. But I'm not going to go there at the moment. So I'm going to leave this.
I think the main thing is like, if it's about shutafut, it's sort of ambiguously so. Right?
Yeah. Now, if I don't know that this is about our Mishnah, I might say that if not, that object that I picked up is as if it were laying on the ground, and then someone else could just go take it from me, and not the Mishnah in particular, that just whatever it is. But if I do think it's about the Mishnah, then I think maybe the talus in the Mishnah is laying on the ground, and not actually laying on the ground, is metaphorically laying on the ground from a kinyan perspective. So,
Great. Okay. Thoughts or comments about that thus far? Anybody? Okay. So the next question I have is if you could just read Rashi on Zotomeret.
Of course I can. All right.
So
Zotomeret. Matnitin tekatani shnaim sheigbiu Metzia kna'u or kna'ua v'achloku. All right. This is right. Zotomeret is our Mishnah, which teaches that two people who lift a found object, something that was hefker before, they have both acquired it and they split it. Ukshemagbia, and when one lifts it, magbia ladat, such a weird word here, sheikne b'chaviro chetzia, right? They lift it with the, I don't even want to translate dot at the moment, but they lift it with either the knowledge or the intention. Without that, it's going to be very problematic. If we say that means kavanah, that their fellow is also acquiring half of it, right? It's a problem because the two of them seem to be fighting over it, at least up until now. Okay. Shma mina hamabia metzia lachavero kana chavero. Learn from this principle that one who lifts a found object for their friend acquires it. Ulkame parich diuka derami bar chama mehecha. Right, and further on, it's going to be on our page today. The Gemara is going to challenge this close reading of Rami bar Chama. Where did he get it from? Me'ezo Bava mishnatenu hu lamadken. Right, from which part of our Mishnah did he learn such a thing? So.
Great. So can you just give us like one more sentence about why you think like dot is so strange here? I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, it's strange in that it's either one of dot usually means like with the awareness that his friend is also acquiring it, right? And the whole point is he doesn't think his friend is, or they do not think their friend is acquiring it. They think that they got the whole thing, right? And maybe if you go to the end of the Mishnah, which we're going to derive from at the end, where each is modeh, maybe then, but even then, when you're picking it up, you're not thinking about picking it up in a joint venture. You're thinking about picking it up for yourself, and maybe your modeh they got it at the same time. So it doesn't. It's like a weird phrase to use here in art to apply to our Mishnah in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of $64 million question, which we're going to get to in more detail in a minute, it's like, does it make sense to think about this as essentially some sort of joint venture when in fact these are like two like parties to a legal dispute over a property?
Yeah,
right.
I mean, I think Rashi puts the word dot in there because of the cheresh and pikeach case that's going to come up. I think that's the reason he uses that term in particular. So,
sure.
Did anyone else have any thoughts about that at this point? And again, we'll kind of come back to all these ideas, but any thoughts about that specifically in this Rashi or at this stage in the Gemara? Cool. I think knowledge or intention feels like a good working definition for now.
Even if neither of those definitions actually make sense in this case. Just
And
to like
there's
sharpen the problem.
There's a significant semantic difference between the two. I can know something, but to intend is a different type of action. I may not intend for it to happen, even though I know it is an inevitable consequence of the actions that are going around me. It's like I don't want it, even if it's going to happen anyway.
Jess, do you feel like there are other possibilities besides knowledge and intention that we're missing?
Honestly, not so much, but I'd love if someone else had to read, because I think, as Sarah says, it's a little bit bizarre as a way to read the Mishnah. And again, we're going to get to that, so I don't want to jump the gun too much, but it's a little strange.
Joel.
I mean, the only thing I could say is that if we use dot as a term of like the thing that's necessary to make a kinyan, right? The whole reason why a cheresh cannot make a kinyan, or a shota cannot make a kinyan is because they don't, or they might in some, a deraita kinyan is because of lack of dot. That my dot allows me to acquire something, my action to work on behalf of somebody else, right? But the la dot is the hard part. Then I would like bed dot would probably be a better term for Rashi. So
Yeah, like right, reading is just like I am compass mentis, I think doesn't make grammatical sense, but also again, like just in the rest of the sentence, right? Kisha magbia lidacha yikna. It's like it seems like it has to be either knowledge or intent, and either of those seem very strange.
if you put a comma there for kisha magbia ladat, sheyikne b'chavero chetzia, right? Something like that might actually play that out. That since I am magbia ladat, then my friend has ability to be kona in it. But Rav Nachum's like, no, Joel, that's yeah. I know that look well after 7 years, so.
Rav Nachum, do you want to like say something about your
Oh, I'm just saying, no, it's for
It's
sure l'dachi yiknei b'chavero. But my question is, there's with the intent or the knowledge, either way, which is different. I agree that's very different. Sheyiknei b'chavero. The question I have is just why is that necessarily the case? That's what it seems to be assuming here, right? It's necessarily that he's doing that. Why couldn't it be that he doesn't have that intention? And that, I mean, we'll get. I'm sure you'll talk about that.
Yeah, that he either doesn't have an intention, he doesn't know, he doesn't want the other guy to get the other, like
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't want the other guy. So what?
Yeah, otherwise he
does it
wouldn't say
have to
it's all
be
mine.
that he knows the other guy's getting it, and if not, then what would happen? Then what terrible thing would happen if he didn't have that? What unexplainable thing in the Mishnah would be if it didn't have it?
right? So I think that's actually the sort of deeper problem is like what is the problem in the Mishnah that this Gemara is trying to solve, or this statement is trying to solve? And is the whatever, we'll float some hypotheses, but maybe let's
Jacob,
read a
did you
little more
have
and
your hand raised there, or was that just?
Sorry, Jessica, who'd you say? I didn't hear you.
I said, Jacob, did you have your hand raised there, or was that just
I mean,
emotion?
I was gonna bring up that with our Mishnah, it would bring a problem with the Shavua if you're lifting it with the understanding that someone else is acquiring it.
Totally, yeah.
yeah. Of many such problems, I think, arise here.
Okay, so I think we're going to move on in the Gemara now. Alan, would you like to read a bit?
Yes.
Let me just
I'd
get
be
the
glad to.
Rava.
Yep. Yep. About the last spot.
There's a little Gillian Hayshas mark if you've
Yes.
lost the place.
Amar לעולם ממלך המגביה מציע לחברו לא קנה חברו. והכה היינו תמה. מיגו דזכי לנפשי זכי נמי לחבר. Okay. So Rava is going to reject Rami Bar Chama's explanation and offer another one. Actually, I could theoretically say to you, someone who picks up a Metzia for their fellow, their fellow doesn't actually acquire it. And the reason why it does work in the Mishnah when the two people are picking up at the same time is because when one person acquires it for themselves and picking it up, that doing it themselves at the same time also is an act of acquisition for the other person.
Great. What did people make of this phrase, Zachi lemafshe, Zachi nami lechavre? Did anyone have any takes?
It's a bit bizarre, right? Like the I get you. So you gotta say the person who's picking up it is a full act of acquisition. It's full enough that it works, but also full enough that it automatically transfers it to another person at the same time.
Yeah, Aaron.
Somehow it's my act of picking up the talus. This is now when I'm maybe in conflict with someone else. My act of picking up my half of the talus somehow confers upon them their half of the talus and vice versa.
Michael?
Like I was thinking about it in the sense of like applying to our Mishnah's case, right? Like if this object was found and Hefker, like by affirming my own ability to pick up the Hefker object and make it mine, I simultaneously affirm that anyone else has the right to do the same thing.
Yeah, Noah.
I find also more than the principle of Magbia Metzia lechavero kana chavero, this principle is really emphasizing symmetry in form, like from visual appearance. Like that symmetry, which we know well from the Mishnah, is really important somehow.
Say a word more about why the symmetry is important, or what you think of that?
Well, in the Mishnah, it's obvious. Like it's just completely symmetrical, both their action and both of their claims. And then Zache lenafshe, Zachi nami lachavre. For some reason, that just also evoked symmetry for me in a way that Hamagbiya Metzia lechavero kana chavero sounded like it could be more like the way Rav Joel explained it is like one person is doing this thing on behalf of another person, but they're not necessarily symmetrical in their actions or how they appear in the world. But I'm not sure. So
And that's really interesting in thinking about the difference between the cases we originally understood. It's maybe some kind of like shlichut type situation to moving to a kind of shutterfoot model. I think symmetry is interesting to think about in that context.
But can I just make a tiny literary point on this? There is a literary symmetry in the last little chunk that Joel read also, right? Tia says, "Zo kimisha munachat al gabe karka, vizo kimisha munachat al gabe karka, velo yukna ze velo iza."
yeah, but it's
If you think that's the text.
yeah, it's telling that's not an al girsa.
Yeah, for sure. Right. But maybe that's part of what's going on there is an effort to kind of make it reflect like the literary mode of the Mishnah or something. I don't know. Joel?
I was thinking about this, and maybe these are kind of the two things, like almost like a Gilgul Zechiyah kind of idea here. Like once you've started it, you can keep it, rolling it up. Or even, we think about a kinyan, it's not quite the same thing, but a kinyan agav, where I can do a method of buying karka and other stuff can come along with it. Here, it's like other people can come along with it, kind of in the same way, right? That I do a method of kinyan for myself, and I can bring others along with me, whether knowingly or unknowingly, right? That they kind of continue along. So.
But I'm bringing others along with me whose like claim is like directly contesting mine.
Whether knowingly or unknowingly, right? Or wittingly or unwittingly, right? Yeah, but so on the other, right, if you don't apply this to our Mishnah and you just apply it on its own, then actually, and it's only about somebody picking something up for themselves and somebody else, then it makes a lot of sense. Rav Nachum, sorry.
No, I agree with what you're saying, Joel. It sounds like agav karka, and it's taltalin agav karka. But I just wanted to point out what is the dispute here? Is the dispute on the analysis that was given by Rami Bar Chama that there is dat here. Does he? I think he agrees with that analysis. There's nothing new in that sense. He's just saying the fact that it works in this Mishnah, it's true that it works in the Mishnah, is no proof to any other case, to any broader question. And I think that's important to understand what's going on. That he's just saying, I agree that in our Mishnah, he for sure had dat, just like you said. But he wanted him to, but the mechanism that it worked was agav, was because he was kohen from himself. That doesn't prove me anything about a regular case of somebody selling to his friend, or some friend, unbeknownst to the other friend, lifting up something for him. Because this is a case where he himself is zoche in it. In other words, because I don't know if there's this concept called chav lechavero, right? It's the Gemara talks about that later, that you can't pay back a debt. You can't, collect a debt from somebody for your friend, because mapitom, you're causing damage to other people. But what if you're collecting debt for yourself? Can you also then collect debt for your friend? Then then maybe you can. In other words, I think here it's a question of since you're already involved, then it works. Then you can be kohen. But if you're not involved at all, you can't make yourself involved. So he's just arguing on the proof. He's not arguing on the analysis of the Mishnah. That's what I'm saying. I don't want to talk too much.
But I do
Rashi
think that
bring-
now, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
No, Joel.
Rashi brings that case up, right? On the Le'olam emalach lo kanach avero, right? He brings up the case of you can't collect a chov for somebody else when other people are also owed by that same person.
So maybe now's a good time to read that inside. Alan, do you want to keep going or do you want to pass?
Sure.
Rashi on Le'olam emalach.
Yeah, I just have one other comment. I was reading this, I was thinking about the two guys in Shabbos, the situation of like either sitting down together and in doing so, like trapping an animal inside of a house, or picking up a beam together. And I'm trying to remember the exact deen, but I think it's a similar concept that like by one person.
I believe they're both pater in that case. Is that right?
They're both right. I guess if one person picks it up and it's like heavy enough for one person to carry alone, that person's chayav and the other person's better. But it's like this weird combination of both being able to, each person is individually participating, but like they make up this collective act together. Anyway, the Rashi. Lo emelach lo kanach avera. Hecha digma biha lo nikaven liknot ba klum. V'tama amar lakaman to have a tofes of alchov in the makom. Right. So Rava says, actually, maybe it's the case they did he didn't acquire for his slip there. And that is in a case in which he did not, when he was picking it up, he did not intend to acquire it at all. Right.
For whom?
For his chaver.
No, I don't think so.
No, I thought it was for himself.
For himself.
He himself didn't intend to get anything for himself.
I agree. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I did not check the Bava Metzia, but that does make sense.
As someone who did see Yod Amud Aleph, just give us like a 2-sentence summary of the case that's being discussed there. Go ahead, Joel.
It's if I owe money to 5 different people, and Rav Nahum is my and one of the people is Sara, and Rav Nachum was like, I really like Sara, so I'm going to take some of Joel's stuff and give it to Sara as payback for the loan. That doesn't work because now you're taking away from other people the opportunity to collect from me. So that's the whole idea there. So here too is the idea of like a Metzia is like hefker to everybody. It's like it's like owed to everybody until someone takes it for themselves. So you're taking everyone else's opportunity away to take this item.
Right. So that's the way in which these two cases would seem like they're potentially analogous, right? That by me grabbing the talus, I'm taking away Joel's opportunity to grab the talus or whomever. So that's why you might think that these two cases are sufficiently similar to compare.
Well, that's why Rava says that if you're walking along and you see a Metzia for your friend, if you see a Metzia, you can't lift it up and say, now it's my friend's. Doesn't work. Just doesn't work because you caused everybody else in the world. Now they can't take this Metzia. If you would be taking it for yourself, no problem, but you can't take it for your friend. How about in our case? In our case, you're taking it for yourself and for your friends. That also works.
Which is sort of intuitive when you think about it in terms of like, I'm thinking about, when people leave stuff on the street, it's totally fine to take the bookshelf that someone's left on the street. But it's not really done to put a little note on the bookshelf saying reserved for Sarah Zager. And that's kind of breaking the rules of found objects. So I think this also makes intuitive sense as well as making Gemara sense.
Just to play devil's advocate for a second, like it does seem. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say I don't know because I think the parallel in this case is like, Sarah is walking down the street, sees a bookshelf, and is like, "Oh, I know that Michael needs a bookshelf. I'll grab it and bring it because his apartment's on my way." Right? Like, which does feel like it's closer to the first case of like you pick it up, it's yours, no matter where it goes from there. Like you're claiming the same right as anyone else.
So the question is, can you acquire something and then transfer it to that person? Right? Because if I'm in the street of the bookshelf, I pick up the bookshelf. My kavanah might be, oh, I'm going to get this bookshelf because Jacob, I happen to know, needs a fantastic bookshelf. But it's not like he acquires it directly through me, and it doesn't make a stop in Josie's reshut. It's in Josie's reshut because I acquire it, and then can I then transfer it to Jacob in his absence for his benefit? I've got this; it's mine now, but I'm giving it to Jacob. It's my intent to give to Jacob, and now it's his.
Yeah, Mike.
Wait, can I actually to revise, right? Like that, Josie, what you're saying has me thinking about it from a different angle, which is like, you pick up the bookshelf intending to give it to Jacob, and someone nabs it from you while you're bringing it there, right? Like, does Jacob have the right? Like, does Jacob have any acquisition in the object from the point at which you picked up the bookshelf, intending to transfer it to him, right? Even though it hasn't like reached his possession, is the idea of like, oh, you picked it up for Jacob, so now when you're carrying it down the street, it already belongs to Jacob. Like, is that part of? Like, I'm wondering if that's part of it.
Yeah, I think that's the crucial distinction, is whether when you pick it up, you have made it Jacob's, and that's what we're disputing the possibility of. Okay, I think let's push forward. Oh, yeah, Sarah.
Can I just take us one step? I'm going to take us one step back, and you can veto me if you don't want to do this. But it seems to me like there's that kind of key difference between the Baal Chov case and the Metzia case, because in the Baal Chov case, there's like 5 distinct debtors, and we know who they are. But in the Metzia case, like we've all decided it's okay if for me to just pick up the, if there's no bar Pulitzer who also thinks it's theirs. If the object is there, I can pick it up and take it. There's no obvious problem that I'm like stealing from the Olam who sort of has equal access to it as Hefker. Everybody thinks that that's sort of okay. So there's something very odd to me about, well, it's just in the case where I'm doing it on behalf of Joel that I'm hurting everyone else, as opposed to in the case where I just take it for myself, where apparently that's fine, right?
What if you were one of the debtors? If you were one of the debtors and you decide, I'm going to collect money for Jessica, not for myself. That wouldn't work, presumably, even though you're one of the debtors. So if the whole world was a debtor to this guy, you still couldn't collect the chov for someone else. You could collect for yourself, but you couldn't collect for somebody else. So in that sense, it is parallel. The hefker item is like a collectible debt to the whole world. I mean, I would say the difference is that nobody's losing anything by me collecting it. But by the debt, somebody could be losing something that was really rightfully theirs. Whereas the hefker object isn't really, it's a windfall. It's not a rightful possession of anybody. Whereas the debt, he has an obligation to pay me back that debt. So I'm losing something by your taking the money. That's I think a meaningful difference. But I was saying that if you have a debt, you also can't take money for the other person. So in that sense, it's similar to the case.
And the reason I can't take money for the other person is because I take money for person A, but person B is out of luck.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Yeah,
even though you could take money for yourself, I think it's kind of like, you're trying to be so righteous. You're taking money for somebody else, but you're causing damage. You can't really call that righteousness if you're causing damage to somebody else. But if you're not righteous, you're just taking money for yourself. You're being selfish. Fine. That's fine. You're allowed to be selfish, but don't kid yourself into thinking that you're Mrs. Righteous, that you are helping others. No, there's something you don't notice. You're causing harm to others also. But once you're doing it for selfish reasons, then go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's something interesting about the societal effect. I think Noam's points about the shul seats are also interesting here. But as long as everyone is just taking for themselves, you've got a kind of reasonably equitable system. As soon as people start taking things on behalf of other people, you bring in a whole host of potential complications or potential ways the system could be perverted. Or, what happens if there's like a mafia leader in town who says, any bookshelves you find on the street belong to me. Like the whole functioning of society gets kind of changed once you start allowing people to acquire things for other people in a way that it isn't before. But I think now we'll probably push on in the Gemara because there's a lot more to see. So, Josie, would you be happy to read?
Happy, maybe, but we'll see. We left off at Teda Sheilu.
Yes.
Okay. Teda Sheilu Amar Lishlucho say Uganovli Veganav Patur. The Shutafin Sheganavu Chayavin.
Great.
So
we should be, but yeah.
So Teda Sheilu, let's compare this to the case. Note that if someone says to his emissary, go steal something for me, and the emissary steals, the person who sent them is patur. But shutafin that steal together, parentheses together, are liable for the theft. My ta'ama lav mishun da'amrina megod zachi nenashe zachi nami lachavre shmamina. What is the reason for this? Is it not the case that we say because since one can acquire for himself, one can also acquire for at the same time for his partner? Learn from this.
Great. So explain what case just happened. What are we talking about?
So here we're comparing this. We're contrasting this to Rava's case, and we're saying let's look at it from the point of view of a shaliach. Like if someone just sends a shaliach to do something, a shaliach acting on its own can't say I was only following orders, and there's no shlichut ba'avera. But two people who act together become liable because as the attempt to acquire, if one can possibly acquire for himself, one can acquire for his partner, his shutaf, or what have you.
Right. So we've got two separate cases we've just mentioned here, right? We've got the first case, which is someone who says to a shaliach, go and steal for me, and then he does. And then the second case is shutafin shigan v'u.
Right.
And the
So in one
din
case, if
is-
you have a shaliach, that shaliach is not going to successfully acquire for you, because you can't send someone off to go steal something for you. You can't ein shlichut ba'aveira. But here you have two people, even though they are committing an avera, they are still working together, and they do acquire something through this illicit fashion.
Yeah, so maybe just say out who is pater in that first case.
So in the first case, the person who sends the shaliach is patur.
Great. Yeah.
Right. And in the second case, they're both chayav in some proportion. It doesn't, not that specific, but they're somehow and the reason they are both liable, as opposed to, for example, one who agrees with another or conspires with another, go pick it up, or we're going to pick it up together, and grab it together. Here is one isn't sending the other, and one can acquire for his partner based upon the fact that he could possibly acquire it for himself. And so since they can acquire equally, they are also equally liable.
Are you reading that as that he could acquire it for himself, or that he does acquire it for at least partially for himself?
In the case of theft, does, but in the previous, but it's not necessary. In other words, it isn't necessary that the migo migo de zachin nafshe zachi nami lachavre means is as long as you can, whether or not you are doing it at the moment. The point is you can't do it for your friend unless you could do it for yourself. Here in this case, not only the can and do are coinciding. Joel disagrees with me.
No, this is a discussion that comes up on, I think it's on Yud or Tet or something. The whole question about whether or not, because you could do it, like because I could, there's a whole discussion of can I give my payout to a certain ani, because I could be mafkir all my stuff and become an ani myself and then take it and give it to them. And then there's a whole question about, it's a double migo at that point. So whether or not you can do that. So you have to probably, at least to fit all the deals, you have to actually do it rather than be able to do it. So.
That also just makes the phrase reads consistently across the different chunks of the Gemara, right? So it reads consistently in the case we were just describing. That seems like it's about the Mishnah, and in this case, which I find sort of pleasing, makes it make more sense consistently. But.
Okay, great. And again, we'll come back to this idea once we get to the Rishonim. So, Josie, do you want to keep reading or do you want to pass?
I'll pass to Jacob if I can. He learned this with me.
Great.
So we are definitely shutafin in this endeavor, and we are equally chayavin.
I don't know if anybody noticed what Rashi does. He changes this story quite drastically.
Yeah, we're gonna get there.
Okay, good.
Yeah, no, we're gonna look at like what does Rashi think is happening. It seems kind of strange, but we're gonna go a little further.
There's a problem with the text that Rashi. There's a problem with the story. You'll see that.
Yeah,
yeah.
Don't want any spoilers.
Wait, hold on, Rav Nachum. Which problem, with the Rashi on the shutafim or the Rashi on the Devar Aveira? Because they're both problems.
Well, the problem I'm thinking of is that shliach ain't shliach Devar Aveira, so of course he's patur. Of course he's patur. Yeah. What's the question? What's the proof? And also the shutafim, if they're both going in and taking it, then of course they're both chayiv. What's the question? Like, what are you proving from this? It's proof nothing.
Yeah, the first one the Radbaz brings up, and he's like, this proof for Rami Bar Chama. It's not for the only reason is because Ein Shalach Devar Avera.
No, you get it. That's what Rashi answers.
Yeah.
Trust
I-
Rashi.
I
Rashi is
derailed.
your friend.
Okay.
Okay.
We're gonna go back to our friend Rashi at a later juncture, probably after the break. But in the meantime,
Yeah.
forge ahead.
So we're at Amarava Hasta. Is
Yeah.
that okay? Amarava Hasta the Amrina and Migu. Cherish Ubukashig be Ubit Siamito so kind of cherish kind of Pikeach. So Rava said, now that we've taught, you've said that we say the idea of Migu Zachel Nafshe Zachi Nami Lechavre, we could apply that for the case of cherish and Pikeach, that when they lift a found object, because the cherish acquires it, the PKF would also acquire it. Islam cherish kana to come migbale ben dot. PKF b'mai kana. But ela ema cherish kana PKF will kana.
Great.
So
Pause and translate.
it makes sense for a cherish a deaf mute that he would acquire, since someone who's a Ben Dot, who has the awareness that he's acquiring, would acquire for him. LPK, my kind of, well, what would the like able-bodied person, what would he be acquiring? So rather say that the Cherish acquires and the PKF does not acquire.
Okay. Does someone want to? Thank you. Does someone want to say out what this case is for us?
I mean, I can say it's the
Yeah,
case
go
where
for it.
you have like someone's a Cherish who we would classify as not being a Ben Dot, and there's PKF who would be a Ben Dot, and they're lifting an object together. And we're questioning, do either of them acquire based on the principle of Migu de Zachil Napshe Zachil Nami Lechavre?
Great. Does anyone have any questions about that at this stage, or anything that's not clear at the moment? Okay, great. Do you want to take us on a bit then, Jacob?
Yeah. Umay Migu. Migu ani Federation the Kanu. Ainami Kane. And so what would this Migo, this like law that we're applying here be? If I guess, are we asking, since we rejected the idea of applying of the implied like Zachi Zachi Nam what would be a law we could we could apply here to understand this? Is that how we're phrasing it, or
How exactly are you translating Migo?
like, well, like since like since we're kind of like, but in context, was it quoting partially, or like in a partial quote of like that first Migo to Zache Linapse Zache Namu Chavre, and then, or that was our first thought of what that was. Now we're asking, is it part of something else and like a different rule or something, or like we're what are we saying this on the back of that one would?
I'm go for it.
I'm not sure if I understood correctly, but basically, I think Rava had this memra saying, since we say migo, then we know in the case of cheresh and pikeach, each one, they're both koneh. And then there was a kashya from the Gemara on that principle from on what Rava said. And now this is an attempt to help Rava. So I guess it's saying, umay migo, what's the migo in Rava's memra? Like we're trying to have a teretz for Rava?
Yeah, but what was the problem with our first attempt? You got to specify. There was an attempt to say something, and we were rejecting it.
That migo, what is it? Migo de zache l'nafshe zache name lechavre didn't work in the case of the cheresh and the pikeach because the cheresh can be koneh because the pikeach is a ben dat and is able to makne the cheresh, but the pikeach can't be koneh because the cheresh is presumed not to be a ben dat and can't makne for the pikeach. And then I guess it's kind of a logical paradox because then the pikeach is also not koneh. Anyway.
Is there a sort of a generic assumption that in this case, if you want to talk about these two as being shutafin, they can't be, because there needs to be some sort of level playing field between any two or more members of a kat that make up a partnership, right? So you have this cluster of people who are acting somehow in concert, and it can't work if there's one of them that can't act equivalently or have the same level of equivalence to the others.
So I will admit that I was very confused by the kasha, because I don't understand why we can't avoid the problem by just saying the charesh doesn't get the pikeach is koneh for themselves and the charesh isn't koneh anything.
Because that's not what, isn't that, that's it says, what does it say? If I go back, it says, he says, Amarav, Hashtada, Amarta, Amrina Migo, Cheresh upikeach, Shegbia, they lifted up together, Shegbihu, Metzia, Mitok Shekana Cheresh, Kana Pikeach. The Pikeach is going to acquire it because the Cheresh got it. So now it says, Bishlam Cheresh Kana de Kamagbiha le Bendat. So I understand how the Cheresh could get it because the Bendat gives it. Ela Pikeach, but my Kana, but how can the Pikeach acquire it? So
But
you
I think
must
there
say,
is
Ela Ema Cheresh Kana. So you must say that the Cheresh is Kana. Because the Pikeach, but Pikeach lo Kana. But that's not what it says.
But my question is, why can't the pikeach be koneh for themselves and the charesh?
Because we just got through saying that when you lift up something, you need the other guy to lift it up for you.
I thought what we got through saying was you can have the other guy do it for you.
But Sarah, let's say
No, you have to. You have to. That's we said. The Mishnah.
I
For
think
some reason, you have to say it won't work. The Kinyan won't work unless the other guy is lifting for you. And since the other guy here is a cheresh, the pikeach should get anything.
Right. So I guess my deeper question is, why do we have that assumption?
Oh, that's right. That is
right. Why do we have that
assumption?
It's very strange.
That's the weirdness of this. There is I have an explanation, but I don't want to say it because he'll say it. But yeah, there is. It's definitely weird. Why did that was my first question? What's going on here? Why do we say that I can't acquire unless the other guy? Joel wants to say something.
Well, lots of people.
Alan was.
Sorry, Jessica,
yeah,
you choose.
It seems like there are two distinct things here. One is acquiring an object, and the other is owning it. Right, like acquiring is action, and owning is a state. So, like further in the Gemara's mind, it is possible for a cheresh to own things, and therefore, like a pikach can acquire on their behalf. But like what the cheresh cannot do is like because they are not bendat is to acquire things. So it's like it actually is not contradictory to say that a pikeach can acquire for a cheresh, but a cheresh cannot acquire for a pikeach. Does that make sense?
I mean, I think the
And
problem.
I think
Sorry, please.
I just wanted to point out that I think in the little machlok at Rav Nachum and Sarah just there, I think we had two different ways of reading our initial statement from Rabbi Bar Chana when it says Hamagbia Metzia lechaveira kane chaveira. Does that mean you need your chaveira in order to acquire something when you're both picking it up, or does it mean you can have your chaveira acquire it in that first case? If that was more confusing than helpful, just to
Yeah, I'm definitely reading as you need, and maybe you guys are reading as can.
Well, I mean,
Well, if it's going to be an explanation of the Mishnah, it probably needs to be have to. But then I have a bigger, deeper question of like, why on earth would you want to read the Mishnah that way? And maybe by the end we can have a more speculative conversation about that question. But
I think there's a difference between a pikeach goes and finds a talis and says, I'm picking this up for myself and to share with my cheresh friend, versus the cheresh and the pikeach pick it up at the same time is a different case because they're both picking up. And that's the big distinction here, right? Maybe this is obvious to everybody and I'm just spelling it out, but right, in that case, it's a problem because each person's holding the other end. In that case, they both have to be zocheh for themselves and the other person. And that can't happen, right?
I think it's helpful if you want to read this Rashi Bishlama Cheresh Kane. But maybe you want to do it later, or
no, we can do it now.
So I can read it if you want.
Go ahead.
Okay, so it says Bishlama Cheresh Kani. The other guy who has seichel. By the way, I should just point out this. Just because somebody is cheresh has to also be that he's not ben dat. There are nowadays people who are chereshim who have dat. This is talking about a cheresh who, in those days, usually didn't have dat.
I think for simplicity, we'll keep that, table that conversation for the moment.
Yeah. I'm just saying, right. Whatever. I'm just saying the Metzia, whatever the Metzia is different, but whatever a cheresh is. Le Rosha Hasheni, he lifts it up, right? Bish lamacheresh. On the other end of the item. Now, I found it very helpful to think of like a heavy marble piece of, a heavy piece of marble, like maybe, a meter long piece of marble that weighs 100 kilos, that neither one could possibly lift up. And so the pikeach lifts up the other end, Rosha Sheni, Litzorach Shneihen. And of course, he's doing it for both of them, because if they wouldn't both be lifting, then nobody would be lifting. It's so heavy. V'Rosha Shel Tzad Cheresh, sorry, I always have to read it in a row. L'Rosha Sheni, Litzorach Shneihem, V'Rosho Shel Tzad Cheresh, L'Gabe Cheresh, Mia Havya Hagbaha. And the lifting that the cheresh does on his side of this big piece of marble is valid for him. Tikkun leib, like there's a takana de Rabbanan that a cheresh can acquire things for himself. Mipnei darkei shalom, because God's ways are ways of peace, and we want to have, and they couldn't be, the halacha would create friction, so therefore they made a takana that the cheresh can acquire for himself. And yet, and on the other side of it is the pikeach lifting for him. Ela pikeach, but the pikeach, b'mai kani, how can he acquire legabe pikeach have rosha shehegbiha hacheresh kimunach al gabe karka? The other end of those piece of marble is actually still on the ground, so it's not a proper lifting, because the lifting that the cheresh did was a lifting without dot, and a lifting without dot is not a lifting. You have to have a lifting with dot. If you have a machine that lifts up the sudar, that doesn't count. It has to be, b'dot. And therefore, it's as though the whole item hasn't been lifted. That's the way I'm explaining. The hagbaha, the cheresh, lo kanya, because it's meaningless, this hagbaha of the cheresh. It doesn't require. Ela midarke shalom ba'alma. It's just a rabbinic takana. And the rabbinic takana never also said that pikrim, so when we said that cherishim can acquire, it was that they can acquire for themselves. We never made a takana that cherishim can acquire for pikrim, for intelligent people. That was not the takana. So therefore, there's no takana going on here. Who's lifting for the pikeach? And if you think about it as a heavy thing, then how could you? He couldn't have lifted it at all. And even if it's a lighter thing, so the amount of force that he attributed to the item was insufficient, even if it's like a talus. The amount of force that he put in was maybe not enough to lift it. But the only way he was able to lift it, this is a very interesting question, which is, I'm benefiting from the fact that he lifted it. So how can I reject him and say he doesn't acquire anything? I need him because I couldn't have lifted it myself. Or even if I could have done it myself, I didn't do it myself. Even if I could have done it myself, but I didn't do it myself because he was helping. So that means I did a little less work. So
Yeah, as Joel points out, we're gonna, when we get to the Ravid, that there's a whole debate about what
what's the case?
What is the Metzias of the case, and what are we lifting, and
You're right, exactly. But I'm reading according to Rashi. I'm just reading the Rashi, and I see all that in the Rashi before anybody other Rishonim.
Okay.
I'm a fan of Rashi and Tosfot. What can I tell you?
Bad thing to be a fan of. Okay, I think we'll push on a tiny bit more in the Gemara, and then maybe we will take our break. Jacob, do you want to keep reading or pass it off to someone else? Jacob, you were reading most recently.
Yeah,
it's been a while.
I hadn't heard.
Go ahead.
But yeah. So I think I hadn't translated Umay Migu Desne.
Yeah, that's where we were.
Correspondent Kanu Hainami. So the Migo that we could, the law that we can apply in this case to make it work. So since to declaration, we would allow them to acquire. This also, the Farish and the PKF would acquire. Is it? Yeah. Haimai. Im Team Salomar Magbia Metzia Chavero Kana Chavero. Hani Mili Hecha de Migbale Adata de Chavre. Adata Dide Migbale. Ihu Lo Kan Ilachrini Makni. Ella Ema Mitof. So kind of be careful, kind of fairish.
Okay, why don't you go back and translate? Please?
Yeah. So what is this? I guess I don't know exactly how else to translate hi my. So if you find to say that we that is the truth that one who lifts an object for his friend, acquires for his friend, these words apply where he's lifting it with the knowledge of his friend or intention of his friend. Here it's like he's lifting with knowledge of him for himself. And he can't acquire it because the Cherish doesn't have that knowledge, that he's not been taught to help the PKF acquire. But if he can't acquire it, he can make someone else acquire. Rather, we should say that since the PKF can't acquire, the Seres can't acquire. The Tema Meisna.
Wait, how did you translate Adaita de Chavere?
I guess I wasn't completely sure, but I guess like with like the awareness of his friend.
Like
Yeah.
having the other person in mind, yeah.
Yeah.
No, exactly not. Like Jacob said it. This is slightly different. The opposite.
It's not that you're being motzi somebody. It's they have to have it in their mind.
They have it in their mind that I'm doing this for them.
Mm-hmm.
Adaite de Chavere. Not that I have it in their mind, not that I have in mind them, that they have in mind me when I'm doing this lifting.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the way you said it, Jacob. Sorry, I can't resist.
You muted your what?
Yeah, I'm trying to force myself to be quiet.
Okay. And I think on that note, now is probably a good time to take a break. And when we come back, we'll look at Rashi and Tosfot. So 5-minute break. If anyone has any burning questions before then.
The other person. So, so in
Yeah.
that sense, I mean, you can claim, right? Well, if the other person didn't pick it up, I would have just picked it up by myself. But even so, maybe this gets us back also into some questions about whether or not you could do that. But you are actually benefiting from the other person to some extent.
Right. I mean, I think there's like lots of interesting kind of like deep questions about like our social fabric that are to be had here if you want to read it as being about as being about these two people who are in a legal dispute with one another, or like, and also like a physical tug of war with one another.
Which feels like a natural lead point into this Rashba.
I didn't plan that in advance.
Okay, if I can say one more thing too, just it occurs to me that per Rava, the shaliach ligneva, like if I like Sarah, you say Joel, go steal such and such a thing for me, and I go pick it up and I steal it, I actually don't own it as far as Rava is concerned, because I didn't have the intention of stealing it for myself. I had the intention of stealing it for you. You don't own it, but I don't own it, and so I might be chayav for Geneva, but I'm not. Someone else could take it from me then, and it's hefker still, or maybe it belongs to.
I'm a chayav for Geneva, but I never was konet.
Yeah, which is possible. We have other cases of that. If there's no
Yeah.
Yerush of the Baalim, right? You also
Okay.
can be chayav
Yeah.
for Geneva and not have ownership over it. So it's not like I'm making that idea up.
I was going to say, it isn't a given that in the case of theft, you automatically acquire it in any case.
Yeah.
I mean, don't we? If the owners didn't despair of it yet, right? Because you can't be makdish something. We have that case where someone steals something. You can't be makdish it because the thief can't be makdish it because he doesn't own it, and the owner can't be makdish it because it's not in his reshut anymore. So there's this time, I steal it, and then the owner has to say, well, okay, I'm never going to see this again. And then you are kona it at that point.
Okay. And on that note, is there a volunteer who would like to read the Rashba? And is there anyone who wants me to share screens, or are you all able to find some version of the Rashba without me sharing screen? Shout if you want a screen share. Great, you can all keep looking at each other, how nice. Was anyone volunteering to read the Rashba?
Joel brought up the Ravad, so you can.
My turn. Okay, I guess
You've been nominated.
All right. I'm reading out of my own book here, so hopefully it should be the same. Shutafim shiganvu chayavim. Right, that one, right? So
Yeah.
Okay. Piresh Rashi Zal im hotzia ha'achad mershut be'alim ladat chavero kedamar b'Bava Kama. So Rashi, as we saw, this is when one person takes it from the owners with the knowledge, or with the maybe even partnership knowledge of his friend, right, of their friend. Okay. As we had in Bava Kama. Perush leperusho, which is always lovely when you have to have one of these. So here's my explanation of Rashi's perush. Medeamar beperek merubeh v'shotef shetavach leda'ato uledat chaviro. Got to flip the page here.
1 second, Joel. Sorry to interrupt you. I think we wanted to do the paragraph before, just so we saw the
I'm
right
sorry.
bit as
I made the
well.
mistake. I wanted to do the paragraph before that too, that has where he quotes the Rava and then gets.
Oh, the tesel lozeh kimunachat al gabei karka, v'tesel lozeh kimunachat al gabei karka. That one. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. No, that was my fault. I gave you wrong information.
Hadi Amar tesel lozeh kimunachat al gabei karka, v'tesel lozeh kimunachat al gabei karka. Right. So that which is said in the Gemara, that if we don't have the principle of Rami Bar Chama, that hakonel higbia metzia lechavero kana lechavero, right? Then it's as if the thing was still sitting on the ground. Piresh haravad zal davka shlo higbi hua kedei she'im yaniach otah echad lo te'aker min hakarka. So the Ravad says this is only or exactly in the case where one of them didn't lift it in such a manner that if the other person let go of it, right, it would not have been completely uprooted from the ground. In other words, if Sarah and I both pick an object and it's in such a case where if Sarah let go, it would actually, that half would actually still be on the ground. But if I picked it up in such a way that if Sarah let go of it, the whole thing would actually be off the ground, then I would have actually acquired it for myself. That's the Ravad's explanation. Okay. Look at Kamina Karka. Aval im higbihu ota kedei she'im yaniach echad shete'akar min hakarka kanu shnehem machmat atzman. All right. But if we both lifted it in a way that if one of us or either of us let go of it, we would have completely lifted it, then we've both acquired it, right? Due to its on its own, shall we say, something like that. All right, or on our own, or from our own power. It's no longer can be considered as if it's sitting on the ground. And each person is then doing a kinyan in their lifting up. But that that's not so clear in my eyes. Doesn't make sense. If that was the case, then we could just make an okim to the Mishnah. We could solve all of our problems. We can get out of this whole sugya and say the Mishnah was just about that case, right? Why is it that both of them kana'uha? Because they both lifted up in such a way that that if the other person dropped it, they would have the whole thing above the ground. And even if you say, well, the Mishnah, never explained any of this, it was stam said that, in any case that the two of them have acquired it. It's still not such a good answer. I have a low that's in brackets. I think that should be there. Lo kana chavero, right? So since that if it were the case that if someone lifted something up for their friend didn't acquire it, then their friend's hand would be like the ground for them. In other words, if Sarah and I were holding it together, right, even if it doesn't matter if Sarah were to drop it, what would happen? Because Sarah's hand is like the ground as far as I'm concerned, right, in the case of where I've picked it up with her. Ve'ilu talit shirosha achat munach al gabei amud zeh, ve'rosha ha'achad munach al gabei amud zeh. So now let's say, imagine a case where we have a garment that's not sitting on the ground, but each it's like a hammock essentially, like it's on two different poles kind of thing here. But uva echad v'yigbia rosha ha'echad she'echol lenatka u'levia etzlo v'lo yagia rosho la'aretz. Right. So, and one of them picks up one half of it, right, in a way that he's able to kind of yank it and to bring it to himself. And the other side of it won't fall on the ground. And another guy picks up the other half on the other column. Hachinami dekamakani batrolokani. Here too, if the first person had acquired it, the second would not have acquired it. In other words, in that case, according to the Ravad's answer, right, since it was never on the ground in the first place, the first guy would have done all the acquiring, and the second guy has no stake in it, even though the first guy didn't pick it up completely. So, because it was sitting on two columns. Ve'echad rahu ve'echad tafus b'mosera de'amrinan lakaman. In the case where one person's riding a horse and one person's holding the reins of the horse, which we have, it's the next sugya coming up. Dezekana masha tafus bedo v'zekana be pigie, I think it is, something like that. V'ashar lo kana lo zev lo zeh, right, where one acquires what they're holding in their hand, the other one acquires some part of the bridle. I don't understand horses. But they don't. All they acquire is what they're holding.
If it helps, Kage is sort of slackened, or the slackened part of this.
Oh, is the slackened? Is that what it is? Okay, thanks. It's the slackened part. And they didn't acquire, neither of them acquired the rest of it. Milo askinan shi minatka lo yagiel roshal arts. Isn't that when you have the reins of a horse? Isn't that the case? Where if you were just to pull it to you, the other end would not fall on the ground because it's on the horse. It's like the column case. And here too, though, the friend's hand is considered like karka, right? So rather, it doesn't matter either way, right? Whether it's on something, it's not on something. It's, it doesn't matter if you, well, I think Hinoshina Hachi is, it doesn't matter if you lift it up in such a way that you could have pulled the whole thing off the ground. If you didn't, in either way, the friend's hand is like the karka and not like the Ravad said. Right. So just to summarize, right, the Ravad, it can't be the case because number one, otherwise we could have answered the Mishnah like that. And even if we could have answered the Mishnah like that, it makes no sense in a case where the talit was already off the ground and just resting on something above the ground, something very, like that wasn't arba amot or something like that. And because we already have that with the horse case, where even if it's off the ground, that's not effective for a kinyan. So, which actually reminds me of the opening, like early sugya in Masechet Shabbat, right? That the yad is like the yad is like arba amot, it's like its own reshut, and therefore we consider as if it's on the ground if it's in someone's hand.
Which reading do you think is more compelling and why? Of the sugya.
The Ravad, or I mean, I think we run into the problem that nobody mentions the case of like if you lifted it up in such a way that that you would have picked it up by yourself. It seems to me the sugya is dismissing that as a possibility. The Ravad is a possibility. So
the sugya, explain more. The sugya is dismissing the Ravad because it doesn't ever raise.
It would have mentioned. It feels like it would have mentioned that if that were actually the case. So.
I do think there's something like there's this sort of interesting. You can tell me if this is too like, this is my philosopher coming out in an unhelpful way, but I think, whereas the Tosfot want to say you can be shutafim even if nobody has died for it, you're just brought into it by the situation. On the other hand, it seems like the Rashba is saying like, no, like the other guy's hand is like kikarka. It doesn't matter. Like it's as if you weren't there, and therefore. Not that the situation brings you into some like special kind of interlocking claims relationship with him. Like he's kind of neither here nor there. He's just standing.
Yeah, the more extreme version of that is the Chidushei Miyuchas Ritva, not the actual Ritva, where he says it's like the Chavero Me'akavo, right? It prevents you from doing it. So.
Yeah.
Well, he is there. It's not that he's not there. He is there. He's there and he's causing a problem. He's like karka. And therefore, even if he's holding it, it's like it's still on the ground.
But he's certainly not an agent in the situation in the same way. He's
True.
He's ceased to be an agent, as I think. What did other people think? Which do you find more compelling, the Ravids or the Rashba? Okay, we're going to do a vote. Put your hands up if you find the Ravids take more compelling. All votes for the Ravids, raise your hands.
Joel's reading.
No votes. No votes for the Ravids. Is that correct? Who's voting for the Rashba? Okay, got some hands left, but who's abstaining? Okay, great. Jacob, do you want to say why you're voting for the Rashba?
I'm not fully sure, admittedly, but it does work. It does help with at least how the argument would be able to exist in some form in our Mishnah, if there's a level that they are preventing each other from acquiring the rest of it. Of course, it still runs into the question of how do they both pick it up? We do have that question there, but at least I can have the argument preserved in some way.
Great. Does one of the abstentions want to say why they're abstaining?
I mean, I guess the Ravad brings up the idea that in the Mishnah itself, right, if two people pick it up at the same time, but we're not at the same time, one person picks it up, the other one's holding it but hasn't picked it up yet, why you can actually make the a logical claim of kula sheli, right? That it's like, yeah, I picked this up in such a way that I could have had all of it and you just stopped me from doing it, and that should not be effective, right? Kind of idea. So I think it maybe works there, but
Doesn't that it has to be able to go like I just don't understand the Metzias then if it like how it goes in both directions. In other words, I can understand a scenario where Shimon could hold all of the thing, but like Ruvain is like hanging on in the end, right? And then Shimon can say Kula sheli, but then how does Ruvain do it?
well, because the reason, because I think at the end we really say that this case is only about the end of the Mishnah, right? If Shnaim Modim, right?
Yeah.
The two agree. So that there is like they really did pick it up at the same time, and it's really only dealing with that case as opposed to the case where there actually was like a slight time difference. So
No, but even if they both pick it up at the same time,
Mhm.
I just don't understand. Like I don't understand the physics of it, right? Like if Shimon is grabbing the pencil in such a way that the pencil isn't going to touch the ground, and Ruvain is just like grabbing on the end,
yeah,
and they get there to that arrangement at the same time, and then also Shimon is doing the same thing,
then they've
I guess
acquired it.
it's just a beam, right? It has to be a stiff object.
Yeah,
Otherwise it doesn't work.
as opposed to the talus.
Yeah, right? Because
You
it
know
has
the
to be
beam.
both that Shimon and if they both come there at the same time and they both say like, right? They have to both be able to make the claim. They have to both be able to
Or a
describe themselves as if they're
handkerchief.
holding the whole thing.
Or a handkerchief,
Mhm.
which is, I'm holding the handkerchief. If you let go, I'll still you won't touch the ground, and I'm holding the handkerchief. So they're both holding it in such a way that they don't need the other one. So
Michael, you look.
Yeah.
Sorry. Michael, you looked like you had something to say, or something you were wondering.
No, I think I'm just like following it until it's still just like it's just like not in my head yet. I'm just trying to like play with my own.
Does someone want to say out just quickly to make sure we're all on the same page? A sentence of what the Ravad's position is and a sentence of what the Rashba's position is, or to try and do that. Sorry, I think I muted myself too early there. Rav Nachum, you were willing to.
Okay, I'll try. I think the Ravid is saying that since the Gemara is saying I need the other person's dot, it must be a case where I'm not lifting it in such a way that I'm really lifting it, and rather he's helping me lift it. And if he would let go, it would go to the ground, or at least part of it would. And if it wouldn't be that case, then I don't need him. Then the whole question doesn't get started. And basically the Ravid is, and the Rashba is basically saying, no, even if I don't need him, it's still currently in his hand, and his hand is, if he's not interested in helping me, then his hand is like the ground, and then it's like the item is still partially on the ground, even if it's not going to touch the ground, he lets go, but it's in his hand right now, and his hand is like the ground, So therefore, it's not. So therefore, in no matter what you say, no matter how you hold it, says the Rashba, you would have the debate of, you would have the requirement of the other person's dot in order to make a kinyan. You'll always need the other person's dot. That's the way I understood it.
Great. Okay. So having seen all the things we've seen and been on the journey we've been on for the last 2 hours, how does this all change our understanding of Shnei Mochzin? How does it change our understanding of that first Mishnah?
Okay, well, this element of da'at hasn't potentially been injected in.
Say a sentence more about that.
Right, that just down reading the Mishnah, we wouldn't have thought that it could have been like a totally, we might have thought that Kinyan was like a totally, maybe Kinyan's not the correct word here, a completely impulsive move, right? Like, I see the talus in the street, without thinking, I grab for it, and but like that alone has as much legal weight as if I were to just make an elaborate plan to pick it up. But then we're like, we seem to be learning out here. It's not exactly clear how, but what each your mental state when you are picking something up matters, even if it's for the limited case of doing it on behalf of someone else.
Really interesting. Does anyone have a response to Alan? Yeah, Joel, was that a hand?
I was thinking, this is not quite a response to Alan, so maybe somebody else, if they want to respond. That's, or if not, I just wondered, this is based on kind of what you guys were saying, and I'm trying to put it all together of like, when the two people pick up the talus, they form a shutafut in that sense. And when they get to Beit Din, we dissolve the shutafut, right? We essentially say, okay, great, you guys both had it. Now we're going to split it up, and you guys are going to go on your merry way, each with half. And it's and in some ways that prevents one of the things that this does, which is like the Rashi we didn't do, is it stops when the two of them are arguing over talus from a third party and saying, well, both of you argued over, but none of you actually has it, so I'm going to go take it now, and just walking away with it, right? It protects, in some ways they need that shutafut because they're protecting the property they want by being able to stop a third person from coming in and being part of the argument at some point. So
That was my point by saying they were unwilling, right? You could form an unwilling partnership in this regard because because looking at the lens of Shnei Mochazim through the idea of partnership here, now these two together in our Mishnah are forming this unwilling partnership. We are now stuck, like it or not, we are now stuck as partners in this endeavor to acquire this, because otherwise, if it weren't for the case of this established partnership, one of us would have just acquired it for the, or one could acquire it for the other. But now, because we are each claiming that we have some ownership of it, it has to be because we have established this partnership.
Yeah, one of the things it's making me think of, sorry, and then Sarah, or Sarah then me? One of the things it's making me think of is that when you get involved in some kind of like liturgical, a legal case with somebody, you are very bound up with them in all these kind of unpleasant ways. Before you both pick up the tallit, you've got no relationship to each other whatsoever. But suddenly now you're connected to each other in all these ways that you weren't before. And it's very interesting to describe that as shutafut when we think of shutafut as maybe a more positive form of partnership. And this is clearly one that comes with a lot of unpleasant side effects. But yes, Sarah.
This is really just a question for Joel, but is it that the partnership is formed when we both pick it up, and then the Beit Din dissolves the partnership when they do the chalukah? Or it's like, I was almost thinking about it the kind of inverted way, where like these people don't think they're in a partnership at all. But I, the Beit Din, need to think of them as in a partnership in order to make sense of how actually they came to possess the things that I, the Beit Din, want them to possess at the end, right? Because I want them to be owners of 50% of the thing at the end of the proceedings, and I've got to come up with some story about like how they came to be owners of that. And so I, the Beit Din man, coming up with a story. That was how I was thinking about it. But in certain ways, yours is more compelling because it isn't like as much of a legal fiction. I don't know.
I was also trying to play on the dot that Rashi brought into it, right? Ladat chavero, right? Of like, yeah, I am in partnership with you. I disagree how much of it I'm in partnership with you, right? It could even be, I think I'm 100% and you're 0%, but I agree that we're partnership enough that we can protect this thing from somebody else taking it at the moment. And the Beit Din is where I want to go sort out how much I have and how much, like any partnership that breaks up, you decide how much does each person get of that partnership. And it's the same thing when the Beit Din. And this way, I actually do, like, not only I want the dot of I mean, I wish they weren't there, but if they're going to be there, I want them to have dot, so we can both protect this item for the moment.
Just,
Alan?
yeah, on the subject of shutafut, I'm heading in your philosophical direction, Sarah, but there's a midrash in Tanchuma that Rashi brings, that when the brothers are getting ready to sell Yosef, that they make a cherem amongst themselves, but there are only 9 of them there, so that they shitfu l'makom imahem, right? That like they actually like force God to participate in this like wicked partnership amongst themselves, which like I think God probably does not want to do, but yeah, there's something really like socially interesting about this fact that when we commit, whether it's like an avera or some like contentious deed, there's this whole like web of consequences and like people who kind of get sucked in after us, like whether they were like actively consenting or not. That's my draft for next week.
No, it seemed like you had something to say. No, I thought I heard someone else. No.
Okay. In that case, so we're almost at the end. We're going to take a minute to go back to the top of the chat and read how you define shutterfoot at the beginning. And then just take a minute to write in the chat what the implications of the Sugya and the Rishonim we've seen are for how we define shutterfoot. So what's changed? Okay. So we're going back in the chat, reading, and then answering. What's the implications of the Gemara and Rishonim for how we define shutterfoot?
It looks like from the chat that there's a lot more nuance about what this might be and what kinds of data are required or not required, which I think is sort of the central question of this. Yes. So if anyone else has any last minute observations, otherwise I think we're good to go.
Shekach on a very thoughtful share.
I think there is defect. Yeah, Shekach.
Shkaya, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah.
partnership.
Thank you, Jessica. Great shiur, very interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
I think, by the way, that that you go back and look at the very beginning of the sugya, it fits very nicely with the Rashba, because it also talks about karka. It's like his hand is still, it uses the word ki'ilu zemunach al karka. What is the karka? His hand.
Yeah, no, I think definitely the karka is being picked up on by the Rashba there.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Shakoyach, very nice. Next week we'll continue on from here. So,
Yeah, we didn't cover everything we assigned, but
yeah, I'll cover that, I guess. Yeah, don't want to miss out. Shakoyach.